Welcome, Kellogg community. I'm Michaela Doyle with the Kellogg School of Management. Thank you for joining us today for Conversations with Kellogg Leaders featuring Harry Kraemer. In this webinar series, Dean Corneli speaks with Kellogg alumni leaders on timely issues and challenges facing the global business community. You can catch up on prior webinars in this series at our virtual events page on the Kellogg alumni website. We will put a link to that site into the chat now. Today's presentation will last 1 hour, and we invite you to submit questions for our speaker at any time using the Q&A icon that's located at the bottom of your screen. We will address audience questions throughout the conversation. And with that, I'm happy to welcome Dean Francesca Corneli.
Hello everyone. It is my pleasure to have another of our amazing conversation. And this time is really with someone that represents Kellogg in such an amazing way. I actually can't believe we waited so long to have this conversation. Harry Kraemer, class 1970, alum, class of 1979. Yeah. He was only 2 years old when he graduated.
Thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate
and
that.
he has an incredible career as a former chairman and CEO of Baxter International. Mm-hmm. He is right now also advisor to Madison Dearborn. Mm-hmm. So incredible career, but I'm sure a lot of you know him as also a clinical professor of management organization at Kellogg, teaching value-based leadership, writing amazing books on the topic. His last one, his fourth one, Your Values-Based Legacy, Making a Difference at Every Age and Phase Life, just came out. I read all of them. I mean, if there is someone to me, and I'm sure in the mind of everybody who represent who Kellogg is, this is Harry Kraemer. He loves Kellogg. We love him. So thank you, Harry, for being here today.
Well, it is my honor to be here. I'm my honor to be here.
It's amazing. Yeah. So let me start with your career, as I say, because I know a lot of you know you as a professor, as a speaker, but you have an incredible professional resume, right? So 23 at Baxter, becoming at the end the chairman and CEO. How did that experience really inform your leadership role? How did it influence you?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, it's always great to be with you. Always great to be with
you. Thank you.
Okay, we can talk about anything,
Yes.
as you know. Well, and I appreciate it. I mean, at the end of the day, the reason I wanted to come back to Kellogg is, if it wasn't for Kellogg, I never would have had the opportunities that I've had. And when I think about people like Dean Jacobs and Wally Scott, and Phil Kotler, who I happened to run into in the cafeteria a couple days ago at 90-some years old, and Ed Wilson. I never would have had these opportunities. So what I learned at Kellogg is what I think you're still trying to deal with now, is how do we continue to develop leaders? And I really felt that combination of hard skills, soft skills, understanding it's all about teamwork, understanding it's not about me, that whole idea of low ego, high impact, but making a difference and being proactive. They were all things that I learned here. And I always used to tell Don Jacobs, whenever I get promoted and he'd call me, I'd say, well, thank you. It really is about Kellogg. And now I got the opportunity to give back again.
Well, we are so happy that,
yeah.
that you are here giving back. Now, let me tell you a bit, I want to focus for a moment on your career, and then we'll talk about all your approach to value-based leadership. Yeah. But that's where it was formed, right? Yeah. And when you were there, how it inspired you, and you probably saw people, because it's easy to say, of course, I'll have a value-based leadership, and then in the practice you forget. Yeah. Did you see people being led astray? How did you bring them back? Yeah. How did it happen during your career?
So great question. So the way I think about it is, when I realized that, as you know, as a leader, it's not about the leader. It's all about the people. It's all about the team, whether you want to call it servant leadership or whatever. And I think what happens to many people, and we've all seen it, is as you move up in an organization, and I watched this as a young guy, it turns out that everybody tells them how great they are. Well, you're great, you're super. And if you're not careful, you could actually believe it. And as soon as it becomes all about you, it's no longer about the team, and people don't want to work for somebody like that. And I figured out very, very early on, when I saw behaviors I didn't want to replicate, that leadership has nothing to do with titles, organizational charts. as you know, Francesca, it has everything to do with the ability to influence people. And the way you influence people, you have to be able to relate to people. And we could talk about that one topic for an hour, the ability to relate to people that you literally understand, regardless of gender, race, age, geography, background. If you can truly relate to people and people know you care about them, they'll do anything. And I realized early on, watching all these people that got involved in ego and narcissism, no, it's not about me. And you create this incredible environment where if you know who the good people are and they want to work for you, you're going to end up doing really, really well.
How very Kellogg! I love that. You know, it's like that's why I love having this conversation with alums like you, because you start talking and it's exactly what we want to teach these days, the students. So let me tell you a little bit more also. But you say it's how you influence them. But how did you take their advice into consideration? Do you have stories where they gave you opinion that changed your mind what you wanted to do?
Yeah. So as you well know, Dean, often what happens is you'll have a group of people reporting to you, and you have this view of, well, I'm the boss. Thank you, but I'll make the decision because it's all about me. And what I realized early on, I would tell my teams, here's the deal. The only reason I know something that you don't is that you didn't ask and I didn't think of telling you, number one. Number two, before I make a decision, well, you're my boss. Of course, you are my boss. But if it's true, you are my boss. And if somebody says to me, hey, Harry, how do we handle this problem? The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to my team. And I'm going to say, Mary, what do you think? Joe, what do you think? And they know, I want to know what they think, and I want them to challenge me. And there were situations, to your point, where one time I wanted to make an acquisition. I really wanted to make an acquisition. But I would say, Mary, what do you think? Joanne, wait a minute. Mary, say that again. You know, based on that, that makes more sense. We're not going to do the acquisition because I have no need to be right. I'm incredibly focused on doing the right thing. And so when you realize it's all about the team and you encourage them, and by the way, it's not just, you require them to challenge. See, if I flipped it the other way, if you're on my team and you're not challenging me and you're just doing what I ask you to do, are you the right person on the team? Because I want you to challenge me. Okay? You know, this idea sometimes, and I know you focus on this at Kellogg, you know, yeah, we're going to be nice people, but guess what? We are going to challenge. Okay? Yes. And when there's an opening, sign me up. I'll do it. This has nothing to do with just humility. We have the self-confidence to know we can do the job and we can get it done. But that requires the team to know it really is okay to challenge because, as I said, I have no need to be right. I'm very focused on doing the right thing.
I love that. And continue on this focus on people and your experience. Were there cases where, you know, some people really had an amazing, were instrumental in some successes? Yeah. And how do you recognize their contribution in those cases?
Well, so it happens all the time. So there was one situation, or one of the fellows who worked for me said, geez, Harry, we have all these divisions within Baxter, and sometimes they can end up like silos. How do we get people to think about how to optimize the total organization? And this one young fellow said, hey, I got an idea, Harry. Let's create an incentive plan where people get much more focused on the total company rather than their individual unit. And that became enormously successful. He ended up becoming a vice president. And I made sure when people said, hey, Harry, great job. Well, this is the fellow who came up with it. He's the one who ought to get recognized, right? And again, people say, well, geez, if other people get recognized, well, they know they worked for me. I'm the one who put them in that job. So I'll get plenty of the recognition. And the more people I can promote, it's phenomenal for them. They're going to want to work for me. And then I also get a lot of the credit.
That's amazing. And I'm already seeing an interesting question coming in. Thank you for all of you. And it says, is there someone who you admired as a great leader when you were beginning your career who you try to emulate?
Yeah. Well, there were several people. I mean, even at Kellogg, Dean Jacobs was somebody that I felt I wanted to emulate. I mean, this is a fellow who just said, I'm going to take this school to be one of the top 2 or 3 schools in the world. And I'm not going to let anything. That was one. And then at Baxter, William Graham, who was one of the founders of Baxter, was the kind of fellow who he literally tried to develop people and said, don't just focus on your function, Focus on how you could actually represent and understand the entire company. In fact, it's interesting, Francesca, he'd say things like, do you want to be, because I was in finance, do you want to be a finance person working for the company, or do you want to be one of the leaders helping to drive the future of the company, who, among other things, knows a lot about finance? Those are two very different people.
It's true.
And that's the other thing I think we try to do at Kellogg, okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, you talk about this. Yes, you're in a function, but no, you are a well-rounded business person who happens to be good at marketing or finance or whatever. And he was the one who drove that. He was the one who constantly challenged me and kept moving me into different positions.
I love that, and you're right, and in a way, it's more recognized now, right? That that roundedness is so important.
Absolutely,
to lead in business.
absolutely.
So it's another interesting question. How do you create, as following what you were saying before, how do you create a culture where staff are willing to challenge those in leadership positions?
Yeah, it's great that we get all these questions. It makes it even more fun. So here's the fun part. Let's just say I'm the leader, and you're one of the people on the team, and I say, hey, I want you to challenge me. Well, if that's all I say, before you challenge me, you may say to yourself, you know, the last 3 people who challenged Harry, they're all unemployed. Okay, all right. Now, so hello. But if I, in a meeting, and say, hey, I want to go east. I said, where I really want to go, what do you think? And in a very, very respectful way, you say, Harry, you could go east, but are you aware of west? Do you think you ought to consider west? Now, some people are going to think, oh, let's wave goodbye to Francesca. It's her last day. She's going to get fired. But when I say, Francesca, that's a great idea. You know what? Forget about what I said. Let's do that. In fact, I'm going to have you lead the team. That's when Mary says to Joe, wait a minute, I thought we were waving goodbye to Francesca. I think she got promoted. Okay? So there's this famous, I use this in class all the time, there's a famous Andrew Carnegie quote, the steel industrialist, who supposedly said one time, the older I get, the less I listen to what people say, the more I watch what they do. So if you want to see certain behaviors of the part of your team, you better live it. You better live it, because people watch everything. They watch everything.
It's very important. You're right, and it's
Yeah.
definitely true. Yeah. Now, let me ask, I see more important asking, but let me ask you one of mine, because there are so many other things. And I say, like, one important thing that is so relevant these days, right? Change is happening, people have to change, leading through change. But that is risky, right? People resist, the organization resists, it can cause a backlash. Do you have example of how you pushed for change and what happened?
So interesting. It's a great question, okay? What do you and I know about change? At the end of the day, it's what we're trying to do at Kellogg. We're going to lead the change. Kellogg had a lot of things that they were fantastic at. Other people start to catch up. Guess what? We're going to continue to change. Absolutely. A lot of the things that we're instituting now. You know, now, the one thing about change, though, you better be able to communicate really, really well, okay? Because with change, there's uncertainty. As you said, there's risk. Oh my goodness, we could fail. Well, guess what? You better let people realize sometimes we're going to fail. In fact, another Mr. Graham comment, you know what, at the end of the day, if you never fail, how do you grow? When do you learn the most is when
Absolutely.
you fail. So, okay, sometimes we're going to fail. But guess what? Here's the formula I sometimes talk about. Change plus uncertainty equals chaos. Okay? So change is great. But how do you minimize uncertainty?
I love that.
You better communicate to let people know, why are we making the change? How does it impact me? Because if you can minimize the uncertainty, well, then the change will go very well. I'm sure you're familiar with what often happens in acquisitions. I buy your company. 90% of the time, the announcement comes out to Francesca and the folks, well, you know what? Hey, in the next 6 months, we'll let you know what's going to happen. Well, the next 6 months, you go someplace else because you don't know. How does it impact my family, my job? Who's my boss? Well, guess what? If I'm going to buy your company, let's talk about on day one, let's minimize the uncertainty and say, well, hey, Kraemer's not a bad company. I'll join it. So the importance of communication. Why are we making this change? How does it impact me? If I can deal with all that, well, then let's go for the change. And knowing sometimes we'll fail, and that's okay, as long as we learn something and we try to fail early.
And what if the change is not so much like a technology or an acquisition, but is like a cultural change?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah. Well, this happened a lot at Baxter. We're dealing with 50,000 people. We're in 103 countries. We're going to change something culturally. Here's the formula. Number one, we better set a clear expectation of what it is and why. We're going to communicate it over and over again so people understand it. And now we're going to hold you accountable. Okay, there will be consequences. If you decide whatever it's going to be, you and I can talk about anything, you decide, guess what? If somebody's involved in sexual harassment, they're going to be gone. We better explain that so that we're not going to surprise somebody. And often people will say to me, well, how do you know if you've set clear expectations on culture? If I've set clear expectation and I have to sit down with you and fire you, and it's a surprise, I didn't communicate very well. Because my whole goal is, I'm not going to surprise you, but I'm going to be very clear on what's acceptable and what's not, and what the behavior needs to be.
Very interesting. And I see here, okay, I have to go back because there are so many questions. But there's someone who heard about the uncertainty, and it says, what advice does Mr. Kraemer have on leading through uncertainty when minimizing uncertainty is not possible? Would you suggest?
So here's a little formula then, and it's a super good question.
Yes.
Super good question. I have these little crazy little formulas I use in class, and I use this at Baxter all the time. There's uncertainty. 3 steps. Francesca, here's what I know to be a fact. Number 2, here's what I don't know yet and why. And number 3, here's how quickly I'll get back to you with what I don't know. So I'm trying to create an environment where I want to build trust, I want to build credibility, I want you to know I have no agenda other than to do the right thing. So right now, here's what I know, here's what I don't know and why, and here's what we're going to try to do about it. Think of any example. When things usually go poorly, it's because you don't follow that. Think of the craziness. You and I can talk about anything. Think about the craziness we went through with COVID, all right? Okay, well, it starts and it's like, well, this will be over by Easter. Really? We don't even know what it is, okay? So it's like, and by the way, wear a mask, don't wear a mask. We didn't explain what we knew. We didn't talk about, and we didn't explain to people how fast we'll be able to communicate with them. So if you're not communicating and you're not openly telling people, here's what we don't know. We don't know right now with all these tariffs, we don't know what the impact of that's going to be on inflation. We don't know what the impact of that, you got a finance background, on interest rates. So let's not tell people inflation's going down or interest rates are going down when you don't know why that would be and maybe it could go up. So it's that openness to build trust and credibility.
I love that about also saying, this is what I don't know. It's a way to, right. In a way, it is minimizing uncertainty. It's saying that and recognize. Yeah. And following that, there's a question here. How do you acknowledge, slightly different, but on that, how do you acknowledge people's skills that admit you may not know what they know without losing credibility?
Say that again?
Sorry. How do you acknowledge people's skills and admit you may not know what they know? Like okay, they're more without losing credibility in that.
So I tell my teams, and I do this now on all the boards, here's the topics I know, here's what I don't know. And then for each person, I ask them, by the way, it's great to have you on the team, Joe. Great to have you on the team, Mary. You tell me what you know and what you don't know. Let's be really open about it. In fact, here's the fun part. When I do this with CEOs sometimes, one guy said, I know I've read a lot about your stuff on true self-confidence, but he said, Harry, here's what you need. I don't want to let people know what I don't know. I hold my card. I'm not going to divulge what I don't know. What do you think about that? And I'm the one who goes, they already know what you don't know. They wonder whether you know what you don't know, or is this whole ship going down? Okay? So the only person you're really fooling is yourself. So I try to create an environment where if I ask Ralph, I say, hey Ralph, what's the answer? For Ralph to say, hey Harry, I don't know, I'll try to get an answer for you. And if he thinks, well geez, what's Harry going to think? Think about this. If it's leadership, influence, relate, who relates to people who know everything? I don't. Who relates to people who never make a mistake? You're not even human. So join the human race, build up trust, build up credibility, and we're all just going to be open with one another.
I love that. Yeah. Now, I have a question, someone who knows, I don't have the names, so we'll give you the names later, but here it says, hi Harry, many may not know that your team at Baxter renamed you when you were CFO to Customer Focused Officer. I didn't know that. Yeah. Well. I was so proud to help us, in brackets, drive a servant leadership culture and believe people saw us having fun while driving results. My question, what do you see as the difference between the challenges we faced at Baxter with the challenges we are all facing in the global marketplace today.
Well, that's wonderful, and it's always great to hear from Baxter folks. I mean, I got to tell you, it warms my heart. It warms my heart. I mean, we just had a fantastic team. We were very, very open. We worked hard, but we tried to have fun. And this whole concept in my mind of let's be open, let's be honest, let's tell people what we know and what we don't know. And we're going to have fun doing it. And my colleagues know we did have a lot of fun, and I give a lot of credit to my assistant, Kathy Strauss, who said, hey, we're going to have a lot of fun. So you know what, an example, it's Christmas time. So I think you ought to just pass out candy canes or something. I thought that was going to be that simple. No, she had the whole outfit on, okay, with mask, glasses, whatever, and I had this big bag with 1,000 candy canes, and I went around, people said, who is that? Well, I don't know who that is. Could that be Kraemer? Couldn't be Kraemer. And I went around to 6 buildings passing out 1,000 candy canes, right? I mean, we're going to work hard. We're really going to work hard, but we're going to have fun, and we're going to treat people exactly the way we like to be treated.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Now, let me ask you also, because there's a question, could be a follow-up here, but so sometimes, exactly, I'm sure you saw or other people you had or other people around you have an opportunity to go up, a great opportunity up, but it's a bit distant from the values we have. What do you do about that?
Yeah. So it's interesting, Francesca, and we talk about this a lot in classes where it's interesting. People get very confused when they talk about values because, and I find by every week in my class, students have to write a one-page self-reflection. Values, purpose, what matters. And what I realize is people get very, very confused. In fact, to a certain extent, I think they get confused, Francesca, between values and preferences. So if you and I are in a team and we say, hey, we're not going to yell at one another. We're not going to yell at one another. Well, if somebody does it, I'm not going to fire them, but I'll let you know I really don't like it. But the difference with values, the two things with values, one, they're non-negotiable, and two, you will not compromise. So if I'm going to move up, if it means that I've got to sacrifice my values, well, guess what? Not only am I not going to move up, maybe I'm in the wrong company. Maybe I should. Now, I'll always ask myself, do I have the ability to change and correct things that are broken or values aren't in the right place? But if you're willing to sacrifice this thing, then it's not a value. And I think up front, many people feel like, oh, well, in order to get up there, I took the view, first of all, I'm one of these people. I never thought I'd be a director. I certainly never. If you told me I'd be the CEO of a $12 billion company, I tell you, yeah, it's some drinking problem. Okay, but what I realized over time, and it was stuff that I learned here, that rather than how do I move up? How do I move? It's no. I'm going to keep developing people, and if I get all the right people, and they work well together, well then I will get promoted. But I was never one of these views of I have to get to this level. And often it's interesting also, Francesca, in class sometimes, I bring in different speakers every week, and whether it's Rick Waddell or whoever, they'll ask them, well, when did you decide you'd become the CEO? And the response most of the time is, geez, I really never thought, and the students are like, here we go, another one of these humility things. Well, it turns out it's interesting. If it's all about the team, and you can attract great people, you're going to do really well. But if I wake up one morning and say, you know what, it's now all about me. Well, it's all about me, it's not about the team. And the chance of me moving up is much, much less. So this whole idea of, no, I'm not sacrificing values. If I sacrifice values, how can I look at myself in the mirror? That's why I get so focused on this value-based.
Yeah, so important. And you're right, it's something that we have to keep repeating.
No matter what.
Exactly. And actually, there's a question here. It is really related about, but it has disappeared from the thing. So let me ask you a different question.
It's okay.
We seem to be living in a time where high ego, ethically dubious leader, the opposite of a Kellogg leader, are rising to top leadership position. Yeah. As a Kellogg leader, how do we navigate this kind of environment?
Yeah. So it's funny because anytime we're serious, Francesca, we always have to have a sense of humor, right? So very often students will say to me, hey, I've been reading a little bit about, Steve Jobs, the book on Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. And geez, Harry, based on what you talk about value-based leadership, it doesn't look like these folks exhibit that, but they're in a leadership position. I always have to say, I'm sorry, I must not have made myself very clear. I'm not saying you have to be value-based in order to be a leader. I mean, just look at some of the people in these positions. But I said, I happen to have many opinions. One opinion is, I think the world would be a lot better off if we had more value-based leaders. And they said, but some of these guys do it. And then where I tease them a little bit, I'll say, hey, look, if you think of some of these people, they're just so unusual. They're so unique in case of Elon Musk, people say, I know I'm not putting up with a lot of good values, but it's so unique, it's so incredibly unique, I'm going to put up with this. So I said to this one student, now, if you think you're as bright as those guys, go for it. But, I've been reading your papers. I don't think so. I don't think so. So you may want to opt for the values piece, because I don't think you're going to make it doing it any other way.
Okay, so that's a great point. Actually, so this question says, Professor Kraemer, any suggestion for mid-career people working at a large organization where senior people don't move much? How to create career opportunities for oneself?
Yeah, perfect. So the way I look at it is, wherever you are in the organization, okay, if you want to move up, maybe one of the things you may want to do is, rather than thinking about what area you're in, what functional area you're in, particularly if you're a Kellogg person, as we said before, no, I am not a marketing person. I'm a business leader who happens to be in marketing. So I would say, I'm going to volunteer to move into something very, very different. And someone says, well, you don't have that skill set. Well, if you move in at a higher level, the question is going to be, can you attract the people to work for you? I mean, what's interesting, Francesca, I find it fascinating. I find a lot of things fascinating, I guess. But if you think about it, people aren't born a general manager. We're all in a function. So the only difference between a functional person and a general manager is it's a functional person who says, you know what, I don't have experience in manufacturing or sales, but I think I've got the people skills that I can attract a lot of people that will do that, and I'm going to listen to them, and they're going to want to work for me. So if people are at a mid-level and the people above them seem like they're not going anywhere, I guess I would say two choices. One, can you learn other skill sets and move around some other vertical parallel line so that you can actually eclipse that and get to a higher level? Or do you say, hey, that's been a great career, and this has been a nice company, but maybe I need to go someplace else? Right? So either figure out a way to broaden yourself to move up, or maybe ends up going to a different company. Or maybe if you're at a mid-level, a larger company, there's a lot of smaller companies that you may end up becoming the CEO of. Because the other thing I always think about, it's always much, much easier to go from a large company to a smaller, as you know, because the smaller company needs some of the skill sets that they can't develop in a smaller company. So think about what are all the alternatives. And as I always tell, and I coach a lot of alumni, is the only person who's going to manage your career is you. All right? If there's a nice HR person around or something, wonderful. But you've got to figure out what you want to do and how to get there.
I love that. Now, let me ask one more question and going back to mine also, because I'm telling you, you're inspiring everybody. There are so many questions. Which aspects of leadership has changed during the last 4 to 5 decades, and which ones has remained unchanged?
Wow. Super good question.
Yeah.
That person would get an A if they were in class, right?
Good.
Okay.
I don't have the names, but whoever you ask this question.
Yeah. So here's the way I think about this. The things in my mind, remember, I always tell folks I don't do Q&A. I do Q&O, question and opinion, right? So these are an opinion. So it's fantastic. So I look at it as anything to do in my mind with values, setting up the appropriate culture. I think that hasn't changed at all. I think that is bedrock of importance. What has changed, as you well know, is the need and the requirement to communicate, how you communicate, how often you communicate, and your flexibility of doing it over a lot of different mediums. And you have to be able to do it very, very quickly. In fact, the way I would describe it is, 20, 30 years ago, if I had an issue at Baxter, I could get the top 8 people together. Let's think this thing through. Let's take the time let's take a day to do it. Well, now, as you well know, with these things, okay, within 5 seconds, it could be all over the internet. So the need to communicate very, very quickly and react very quickly has changed significantly.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure you deal with the dean, everything that's going on in Washington. I mean, hello. It's so how quickly you need to be able to move, number one. Number two, as a result in the last 5 to 10 years, particularly the last 5 now, with COVID, remote work, hybrid work, much, much more difficult to manage a team of 10 people now than it was back then. But here's a good example of the change. I get asked this a lot. They'll say, well, geez, Harry, I've got 10 people on my team. They're scattered all over. They're remote. Harry, here's what I'm doing. You keep saying communication. So, Harry, every Friday, I get all 10 people on a Zoom call, and Harry, does that help? I said, well, that helps, but if you're really going to build a team, what I would do, if I'm going to have that call on Friday, believe it or not, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, I would have an individual call for 15, 20 minutes with each one of those people individually. And when I call you, by the way, the conversation is going to be, hey, we're going to get through all the numbers on Friday. How are you doing? I think you mentioned that your 80-year-old grandfather's living with you, and he's got Alzheimer's. How's that? Is there anything we can be doing, right? And then I'll call Bill and say, hey, Bill, you're a single parent with a 5 and a 6-year-old. How are you doing? How are you doing? Right? And the way I think about it is that old, supposedly the credit goes to Teddy Roosevelt, 26th President of the United States.
Yes.
A quote which I didn't know was his, but I use it now every day. People truly do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. And if those 10 people know, hey, Mary, I know we're going to have that meeting on a certain day, but I think you said you're training for the marathon. Would it be better to have that a different day? And how's that training going? And tell me a little bit about that, right? Then on Friday, it's, are we hitting the numbers? What's happening in the market share? How much funds have we raised? I mean, we'll get into that. But if people know that you care about them, it's not just words, you truly care, people will do anything for you. People will do anything. And I think back in the ages where everybody was there, that was just a lot easier to do. But with this remote thing, if you're not plugged in and you're not constantly communicating, as you know, Francesca, there are companies that in the last several years, they've hired hundreds or thousands of people that they've never even met. Okay? Well, we talk about culture. How do you build a culture? How do I build a team? If the only time I've ever seen you is on one of those little blocks on Zoom, can you lead people? Can you manage people? Are people going to want to work for you? Hard to determine if you don't really get to know them as individuals. That's changed significantly.
That is, you're right, an incredible challenge going forward. Let me ask you something related. You're talking about how important is your team, you want the best team, you want them to disagree with you. Yeah. But when you form the team you choose people, everybody is a bit susceptible. You like people who think like you, because it's like, oh, that is very clever, and so on. And then you could end up with a team that, yes, is free to disagree, but tends to agree with you naturally because they double down.
Exactly.
So how do you build a team that is truly diverse and can cover your weaknesses?
Yeah. Super good question, okay? So this comes up when I'm talking to CEOs a lot, and I'll challenge them. Hey, I've met with all the members of your team. They're all just like you. Okay, so I mean, hello. So they talk about groupthink, right? And so the first thing I tell senior people is, you first have to get over the personal hurdle of, I have no need to be right. I'm focused on doing the right thing. And as a result of that, I would like people to challenge me. I want people to challenge me. And you create that environment by realizing, wait a minute, the more diversity we have, the more wider the area we have, the better we're off we're going to be, okay? And again, in that environment where you and I can talk about anything, I mean, what I find absolutely remarkable, okay, is there is no question that diversity is unbelievably important for a great team. Now, like everything else, you got to find the right balance, okay? That doesn't mean we're going to have 32.3% women or this. So this is not a numbers exercise. I think that's where people get confused. I'm the guy, I like to look at everything as a balance, okay, balance. There is enormous benefit of diversity, a tremendous benefit. But if you take it to extreme, you have a serious problem, which is what we're living through as a country right now, right? And you have to, no matter what the issue, one of my favorite topics is balance. It doesn't matter what the challenge is, how do you find the balance? Okay, whether it is gun control, whether it's immigration, whatever, it's not one extreme or the other, it's how do you find the balance? And I think that's one of the biggest issues we got to deal with. And I've got to get as many different views as possible, but the reason some people don't do it is because they'd kind of like to do what they want to do. Well, if everybody's just like you, they'll do what I want to do. No, I mean, I know I repeat it a lot, Francesca, but if a leader can, one thing to realize, I have no need to be right. I'm fanatically focused on doing the right thing. Well, then you're incredibly open to diversity because you want people to disagree with you. But a lot of people, they get their ego in the way. And think about it. If I keep getting promoted and everybody's telling me how great I am, the chance of me deciding one day, I'm pretty great. I'm pretty great. And I don't need anybody to disagree with me because I got all the answers. There's a lot of people floating around like that. Yeah. More people floating around like that than you'd imagine.
That's dangerous.
It's very well. I think that's why we're trying to teach at Kellogg not to do that.
Absolutely, I am so glad, and that's why I'm so glad to have you here. Yes. Now I also want to talk about you clearly, and this is coming across, like a deep passion for living and teaching how to live a value-based life, right?
Yeah.
It's not only as a leader, but in everyday's life.
Yeah.
How did you, during your career, develop this passion? How did this come together?
Yeah. I'm smiling only because when I mention this to the students, a lot of times they can't sort of believe it, because here's how I weave it in.
Yes.
I weave it in by saying, and you've been good enough to hear me talk several times, what I find interesting is I basically start off this way. I say, you can't possibly lead other people if you can't lead yourself. So how do you lead yourself? You have to be self-aware. How do you become self-aware? You turn these devices off, you get off by yourself, and you ask yourself some pretty basic questions. What are my values? What is my purpose? What really matters? This is not an advertising campaign. This isn't a job interview. I'm by myself, maybe significant other. What kind of a leader do I want to be? What kind of example do I want to set for other people? And then I'll say, the way I do this, and I started this when I was at Kellogg, I literally take 15 minutes a day and go through a personal self-examination. Now, some people could call it prayer, some people call it meditation. I call it self-reflection, where I literally ask myself at the end of every day for 15 minutes, what did I say I was going to do today? What did I actually do? What am I proud of? What am I not proud of? How did I lead people? How did I follow people? If I lived today over again, what would I have done differently? And then the last one is, if I have tomorrow, being fully well aware, sooner or later I won't, just turned 70, okay? How would I operate differently on whatever dimension of your life is important to you? It could be as a parent, as a spouse, as a Christian or religious person, whatever. And I started doing that 40 years ago when I was at Kellogg, and the students will say, well, do you do that every day? I do it every day. It's just 15 minutes. If I said I do it for half an hour, I could convince myself I don't have hard to convince myself I don't have 15 minutes. Even you and I are not that busy, okay? And then they'll say, all right, so you do it every day. Yeah, it's like most of us brush our teeth every night. I do this. And they'll say, do you write it down? I write a little something down in my notebook. Why? Because if I don't write anything down, am I self-reflecting or am I, daydreaming, particularly if I had a couple of glasses of wine? I could get a little confused, okay? And so I started this because I had the opportunity when I was at Kellogg to go on a 3-day silent retreat. And it was my future father-in-law basically convinced me I had to do this if I was going to do it. And I did this 3 days. For me to be silent for I have a hard time being silent for 3 days.
I don't believe it.
For three hours, yeah. So I did this, and they literally say, you can't lead yourself. What are your values? What's your purpose? And so not only did I marry his daughter, but for the last now 43 consecutive years, wherever I am in the world, I fly to St. Paul, Minnesota to go on this 3-day silent retreat every year. And the way I think about it is all of our listeners, you have a strategic plan for your company, and then you have your operational, how are we doing? And I thought, why wouldn't you do the same thing for yourself? So at Kellogg, I thought, you know what? I will spend 3 days once a year without these devices asking myself how I could be a better person, better leader. And then I got my little 15-minute operational piece. And it has an enormous impact because think about what most of us have to deal with. Worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, stress. What do we know about these things? Waste of time, completely waste of time. You and I talk about this. Non-productive, and it's not good for your health, right? And so I realized, wait a minute, if I can be self-reflective and realize it does not matter, seriously, Francesca, it doesn't matter what happens, because no matter what happens, I know what I will do. 2 things. 1, I'll try to do the right thing. 2, I'll do the best I can do. I know we're going through this quickly. If you can convince yourself, really convince yourself that no matter what happens, some of the challenges you've got to deal with as a dean of this school right now, if you can convince yourself, no matter what happens, if I got the right team and I listen to them, I'll try to do the right thing, I'll do the best I can do. I'll try to do the right thing. I would then argue worry, fear, anxiety, pressure, and stress can be significantly reduced. You can't eliminate them. Welcome to the real world. But I've always taken the tact of all the issues at Baxter, all the issues on boards. People want to go crazy. No. What happened? Why did it happen? How do we deal with it? We'll try to do the right thing. We'll do the best we can. And that mindset, for me, ever since I was at Kellogg, to me it's like, you and I talk about a lot of challenging things. Whatever it is, let's deal with it. I often will quote my grandfather. I give him a little credit here. When I was in one of my very first jobs, I would complain. And I'd say, Grandpa, you're not going to believe what happened today. You're not going to believe it. And he used to look at me and say, Harry, That's why they call it work. And then he'd pause and he'd smile and he'd say, Harry, let me give you some big advice. He said, Harry, when you go to work tomorrow, if there are no problems and there are no issues, you may not have a job. And I thought, whoa, that's pretty deep. So 15 years later, I'm the CEO of Baxter. You're my executive vice president. You come to my office, Harry, we got a real problem. I say, Francesca, that's good for you, right? How can it be? You still have a job, okay? So let's just put it in perspective. That's so key, because I mean, honestly, when I think of the pressure, very openly, the pressure you're under right now, running this school in this environment with everything going on in Washington, it literally could be overwhelming. It could be, but if you're blessed, if you have a good team, and you have a very, very good team. I think of the people.
Yes.
I think of the people who work for you. I won't go through all the names. If you realize you got those people, and you say to yourself, I'm blessed, I got this great team of people, I'm going to rely on them, then you'll deal with it. You'll deal with it, right? Because the school's in great shape, the ratings keep going up, we're great, all right? But there's going to be a lot of challenges. There's going to be a lot of people that, are dealing with things that seem a little crazy. How do we deal with it? We'll try to do the right thing. We'll do the best we can do. It's so ingrained in me. It makes life very simple.
And it's very important. While you were saying, I was thinking at the beginning, I should have said what a great mentor you've been. And you've been telling these things, and it is true. In this time, I get up in the morning and I say
we talk about
exactly these sentences, and I feel better, and I think of you. So it's really important. Now, there's so many questions, so many things. Before I get to your last book, there's someone who's read your previous book, and it says, you teach on the concept of 168 hours per week and how you balance your life, family, work, etc. So I'm interested in this question too, because I think you have more than 160 hours per week. So let's ask you, what does your time split look like these days?
Yeah, okay, all right. So,
but I'm still convinced you have more than 168.
Well, it depends on how much you sleep. That's all part of it.
That's true.
So I'm thrilled that this person gets an A too. Okay, I don't know the names, but this is fun, and I think everybody should take a minute to think about this. Okay, every place I go, all around the world. You and I were in India together. Okay, it doesn't matter where in the world I go. When I ask people, have you heard of this concept called work-life balance? Everybody says, oh yeah, I hear that. And I say, all right, now here's what we're going to do. We're going to ask this. Look at my hands. Work-life balance. Doesn't it look like you're either working or you're living? Now, you and I are working enough. If that's not living, that could be scary. So I decided, you know what? No, it's not work-life balance. It's life balance. Okay? It's life balance. And then I interviewed a lot of people for this book, Year 168, and I literally said, Joe, how do you define life balance? Mary, how do you do it? And some people say, well, I got 3 buckets. It turns out, Francesca, there are 6 buckets that I think take virtually anything anybody would want to do. Now, some people don't use all 6, and that's okay, but there's 6 buckets. There's one bucket for your career, 1 bucket for your family, 1 bucket for some people for your faith, 1 bucket for your health. That's what you put in sleep, exercise, right? There's a bucket for fun, and there's a bucket for, I call it being a best citizen, making a difference in the world. We're here for a blink of an eye. What difference do you want to make the short time you're here, right? You got 6 buckets. And by the way, I always tell the students, I think it's 6. If somebody comes up with a 7th, I'll do a rewrite of the book. I really will. That's how flexible I am, right? So there's 6, okay? So then I ask people, all right, what percentage of your time would you put in each of those 6, right? And by the way, simple exercise that folks listening may want to do. You take those 6. The first column is your goal on average. Now, if you and I are in India that week, hard to bend. On average, what percentage of your time would you put for those 6? First column. Second column is current reality. Ooh, this hurts. Now you look at your calendar for the last 3 months. Where did you spend your time? And the third column is the difference. Now, if you have to meet the person, they may be listening today, who says, well, there's an amazing coincidence. My goal lines up where I spend. I concluded in the book, by the way, I don't think you can achieve life balance. You pursue it. If you're close, congratulations. If you're far away, you probably ought to ask yourself, why did I say my health was important if I never exercise, right? So you ought to ask yourself that question. Now, here's the fun part. Because I do, as you know, I do at least 2 talks every week for the 1 Acre Fund in Africa. Well, the fun part is every time I do a talk, instead of a speaker fee, I do it for a lot of alumni. I say, make a contribution to the 1 Acre Fund, buy a lot of books. So a couple weeks ago, I won't mention the country. One company, they said, we're going to buy 500 books and we'll make a donation. And the CEO was in the room and he said, hey, before you start, what's this 168? I said, you bought 500 books. He goes, well, I didn't get too far. It's on the cover of the book. And he said, well, can you give me a hint? I said, okay, I'll call the guy Joe. I'll give you a hint. Joe, when you're working hard, really hard, how hard are you working? He goes, 24/7. I said, let's go slow, Joe. 24 times 7, carry the 2, you usually get 168. Okay, so everybody's got 168 hours, okay? And so to me, the question becomes, how are you going to look at your 168? And it's sort of like, you can't do everything. So it gets very serious. You know, what are you going to do less of? What are you going to eliminate? What can you do differently, okay? And here's the interesting part. An awful lot of people, and I think your viewers know this, they don't know where they're spending their time, okay? It sounds kind of crazy, but here, great example. I had one senior executive say to me, Harry, I need to talk to you. I'm having trouble with my marriage. I'm having trouble with my children. I'd love to talk to you. I said, I don't have a lot of answers. Nobody got opinions. I'd love to talk to you. I said, okay, well, tomorrow's Saturday. Why don't you stop by? We'll talk. Well, I can't tomorrow. I'm golfing tomorrow. I said, okay. Well, Sunday after church, well, I'm golfing on Sunday. Well, I'm a math guy, right? 5 hours of golf times 2 is 10. Now, if golfing for 10 hours is more important, I'm not going to judge that, but this guy sounded like he was surprised. And when my all-time favorite saying, my students know, I'm surprised you're surprised, okay? I'm really surprised you're surprised. So the benefit of this is, do you know where you're spending your time? So students will say to me, I don't have enough time. I said, well, how much television are you watching? The average American now spends 6 hours a day on social media. I don't have 6 hours. You don't. Okay, so literally taking the time to figure out what's important in your life. And by the way, the reason why, and this whole balance topic you're in, think of the number of times people come up to you and I and they'll say, I'm having trouble balancing my life. My observation, most people that are having trouble balancing their life haven't been self-reflective enough to figure out what they're trying to balance. That's why you better figure out what matters. And what matters to this person is going to be different than this. But if you haven't figured out what matters, how could you possibly balance it?
Absolutely.
I'm thrilled that you asked that question.
Well, I have an even also important one about your most recent book, which is, as I mentioned before, your values-based legacy, making a difference at every age and phase of life. And I want to ask you, what inspired you to write it? But before, there's also a question here that says, hi, Harry, I've been reading your book since the first one. Where can we get the latest copy?
Well, so now that you're mentioning it, okay, I'm happy to promote it because all the proceeds go to the 1 Acre Fund.
Exactly,
okay?
I know, you're very generous.
And by the way, it's all because of Kellogg, right? Because here's basically what happened. It's sort of, I thought I'd be the last person to ever write a book, okay? And I think I told you this story. When I was first teaching my first class, a student said, you need to write a book. And I said, I don't even write short emails, okay? And this fellow said, can I take your class again? And I said, you've already taken the class. I mean, and I didn't want to say, are you slow? I mean, he took the class. And he literally audio taped the entire 30-hour class.
Wow.
And he gave me 200 and some pages. And I thought, how hard does this be? Of course, you don't realize how poorly you speak until you read a deposition, okay? And then I thought, I don't know how this is going to work. And so I spent about a month or so, only one chapter. And I thought, when I'm 90, I'll write this thing down. And crazy enough, he came to me and said, where are we with the book? Where are we? And I'm thinking, I used to have 55,000 people. Now I got one 27-year-old telling me what to do. And he said, I've already got you an agent.
Wow.
So wow. So the bottom line is, and the whole idea was for the class, how do you become a value-based leader? Self-reflection, balance, knowing yourself. And so that was the first book. But then every book was the students. They said, that's how you're a value-based leader. It's called From Values to Action. They said, well, how do you lead a value-based organization? Well, that became the second book, Becoming the Best. And then the students said, right before COVID, how do you live a value-based life? Well, that was year 168. And I thought, now I know I'm done. But a little over a year ago, a couple classmates, women said, all right, well, how do you live a value-based life? What do we do beyond this life? What are we doing? Any Kellogg person, we're blessed, we're fortunate, okay? What do you leave beyond this? And I thought, what's legacy? And when I first started looking it up, I realized an awful lot of legacy sounds like, oh, you've made a lot of money, you set up. No, legacy is, what are you doing as an individual? You know, as an individual, as a parent, as a friend, as a spouse. And I interviewed a bunch of the Kellogg students, said, you should talk to this person, you should talk to that. And it was very interesting. Some people said, well, geez, I don't know if I can make that much of an impact. I'm just an individual. Well, as you know, one individual starts doing something, another one does, you start this cascade. Or another Kellogg student said to me, you really need to talk to this woman. She lost her son as a result of an overdose when he had some injuries. And she said, you know what? I could sit around and get upset, but you know what? I'm literally going to figure out a way to reduce the medications that people get where they have overdoses. And she started a foundation, right? And of course, what Andrew Yoon and Matt Forte and the Kellogg students did with the 1 Acre Fund, it was unbelievable. These guys just said, because I always love to tease people and say, who's going to deal with all these issues? And there's this famous group of people you and I know called those guys. No, we are those guys, okay? And this fellow and his team of people said, you know what? We can't get over the fact there's something like almost several billion people that are starving in the world. And some of them are farmers. I mean, how does a farmer starve? And he said, you know, if we could get these people hybrid seeds, basic fertilizer, we could double or triple the crop yield. So you think, okay, what's the guy going to do? Well, this team of people, okay, so folks know, they've been over there now for 17 years. They have doubled or tripled the crop yield on 5 million farms that has saved the lives of 12, 13 million kids. And when you try to tell them how wonderful it is, they'll say, well, you know what, we're not even 10% of the way there. So this whole concept of, are you watching the movie? You know, there's trouble with healthcare, starvation, digital divide. Okay, you're concerned about it. Are you watching the movie or are you in the movie? And this whole idea of, as Kellogg folks, and we know we're sponsoring all this nonprofit work, yes. What difference can we make in the world? And I think that's part of what I think we're trying to do with Kellogg. How do we, you know, rather than just talking about the issues, what are we going to influence? What impact can we make? And I think the world desperately needs more people that step up, and that's the whole purpose of this 4th book, Your Value-Based Legacy.
I love that. I love that. I have I mean, we don't have a lot of time.
We could take 3 or 4 hours. We could just extend it.
Yes, exactly. Why I'm not surprised. Time is flying talking to you. Yeah. Here, this is an interesting one. Harry, in a world where external success is often measured by metrics like profit, power, or popularity, how can leaders consistently anchor themselves in values when the rewards for doing so aren't always immediate or visible?
Yeah. Great question. So again, I always say opinions, Francesca. I think what you have to almost do as an individual, and it goes back to the values and it goes back to self-reflection, what really matters, okay? I mean, I always say, and I try to advise people, you may have reached a certain position, but never ever let your identity be your job, okay? I mean, when I was leaving Baxter, it's like, wait a minute, you're the CEO of a big company. Well, now you're just going to be a teacher? Well, wait a minute, no, it's Harry Kraemer. Sometimes I'm a father, sometimes I'm a spouse, sometimes it's just one part of your life, okay? And maybe at some point you go into politics, you do this, you do that. But I think if you allow yourself to believe it's all about monetary rewards or how much money you have, it comes back to what really matters. And I really do believe that unless you take the time to think about this, and whether it's your faith, whether it's your beliefs, whether it is how you think about the world. But again, a good example of that one is, I may have mentioned this to you, I got trained on this very early because my father, when I was a young person, would say to me, hey, Harry, have you ever seen a hearse go into a cemetery with a U-Haul attached to it? And I'd say, Dad, he goes, Harry, it seems to me 90% of people, they're accumulating all of this stuff. They must either think they're going to live forever or they can take it with them. If you can't take it with you and you're not going to live forever, what are you doing with all this stuff? And he'd say, look at your grandfather. You know, he's turning 80. Everybody, they're trying to get rid of this. Harry, when people are 50 years old, do they not realize that 30 years later they'll be 80? I'm a math guy, 50 plus 30.
Yes.
So I'm surprised you're surprised. So when they say, well, if I'm too good of a person, I may not accumulate. Well, what do you want to accumulate? What really matters to you? What matters to you? And even with the students sometimes, I'm kind of pushing of, all right, yes, you want to do well, but what do you really need? And what really matters? What really matters from your value standpoint? And I think if you're trying to build a legacy and you're thinking about what you want to leave behind, is it, oh, I was this title, or I accumulated this much money, or is it, what difference have you made in the world the short time you're here?
That's something we need to all remember. And I have only question for one question, and I wanted to go back just as a conclusion to you, like you being a professor at Kellogg, right? Mm-hmm. How have that helped you to hone your messages while teaching, besides the push to write the book about value-based leadership? Because you're so good at talking about experiences, they're relatable.
Yeah.
What does it mean to be a professor at Kellogg for you?
Well, it's phenomenal. It's phenomenal. Okay, and at some point, when you ask, well, geez, Harry, what's your plan? Because you're 70. What are your plans? I'm very open about
You're
it.
35.
Well, I think I'm 35. I feel like I'm 35. But what I end up having to say is, I should probably let you know this. I'm probably down to my last 20 years of teaching. I'm probably down because Julie told me 45 years ago when we got married, for better or worse, sickness and health, not for lunch. You being home for lunch, you're too hyper. That's not going to work, okay? But the reason why I love it so much, and I'm sure when you're teaching, you realize this. What I realized was, until I can explain something, until I learn to explain something to a group of very bright people that are going to ask the kind of questions they're asking here, I may think I understand it, but not really, right? So I don't think when I was at Baxter, I would do this stuff, but I don't think I could explain it. Now, because of the questions that are asked and the way people push me, this becomes so clear. It becomes like, I'll give you a good example. When people would say to me, oh, geez, Harry, you were the CFO at Baxter when you were 36, or the CEO when you were 40. Boy, you must have been this bright guy. And I'm thinking, how do I respond to that? I'm not that bright. I know I'm not. But then I realized when the students ask me, Harry, what is it? So lately I've been saying, what is it? Well, I realize, number one, I get to know everybody. Number two, by getting to know everybody, I figure out who really good people are that'll challenge. And number three, I try to create an environment that every job I was ever in, every board, I try to create an environment that everybody wants to work for me. And what's so interesting to me is that people say, well, can you give me an example? So the way I end my classes sometimes, Francesca, I'll say, well, how many of you want to be value-based leaders? Everybody raise their hand. And I'll say, well, how many of you really, truly relate uniquely to every person that you meet? And they'll say, well, I raise my hand. And I'll say, now don't raise your hand this time. But I said, when you walk in the global hub, how many of you say hello to Rachel, or Ken, and if you're going to grab yourself a Coke, you get one for them? How many people do that? How many of you, when you go in the cafeteria, know the names of the folks and how many children that they have? Okay, I do. How many of you, when you're working late at night, you and I do, and the cleaning crew comes in, how many of you take 2 minutes, thank them for what they're doing, and maybe empty out a trash bag? And I told the students the other night, the reason I do the trash bag thing is that, and it's not being a nice guy, it's actually being kind of selfish, because it gives me a moment to realize, in my case, if it wasn't for a little bit of luck, timing, Kellogg, the teams, mentors, Don Jacobs, Mr. Graham, the man upstairs, Faith Weiss, I could easily be part of the cleaning crew. I'm under no illusion. And if you never forget where you came from, and the students are always challenging, well, then it all becomes incredibly clear to me. Very clear. Very clear.
Harry, I still have so many questions. I apologize to everybody. I was waiting for some, and then we don't have time. But I'm so glad we finished on this one, because what you're presenting is always, it's easy to talk about values, but then when the examples you give of everyday life and how you stay true to it, it's amazing. And because I have seen you now, I've known you for 6 years, and almost 6 years, and I've seen how incredibly true to your values you are.
I remember the first day I met you in the
I remember I was welcomed, I was coming to welcome, and he was in the first line, and you told me, and I didn't know who was this guy, who told me, anything you want, I will be there for you, and I will never forget.
Appreciate that.
So I really feel like you really exemplify this. Nobody exemplifies what we try to teach at Kellogg more than you. Well, so thank you for all you're doing, and I'm sure everybody here will go away feeling like they're walking on the clouds. So thank you, Harry. Thank you so much.
Always great to do it. It's always fantastic to get together with the alums everywhere we go. I love to get together with the alumni. So.
Absolutely. So I wish you all a great remaining of the day. Thank you for being here, and thank you.
Great to see everybody.
Bye.